Hello everybody and welcome along to a brand new video where today I'm concluding my look back over the Russell T Davies era of Doctor Who. We've looked at series 1 through 4 and today, just to cap it off, to finish it off, the final few RTD episodes, the 2008 sort of /9 special season. Maybe it shouldn't really be called a season, that's kind of debatable as it is only really 5 episodes and one of them is a Christmas special from 2008. Ultimately this whole sort of circumstance came about, I believe, due to particularly David Tennant's commitments, I think, to theatre work, among other things that he was doing during 2009. I believe Stephen Moffat wasn't quite ready to start in 2009 to sort of get a series together for then, so it had to be 2010. And so they left that gap between sort of having series 4 ending in July 2008 to ultimately series 5 not airing until April 2010. So nearly 2 years having to try and plug the gap with some sort of Doctor Who. So naturally there's a Christmas special in 2008, The Next Doctor, and then we have a couple of specials during the year, one at Easter time in April and one in November time, in sort of run up to Christmas and the run up to the big old finale, and then obviously the 2-part sort of final episode for the 10th Doctor on Christmas Day and New Year's Day in 2009 and the beginning of 2010. So it wasn't, I think, the ideal scenario necessarily, because obviously it meant basically a year with only 4 episodes of Doctor Who. Well, actually only 3 episodes of Doctor Who actually aired in 2009 with Planet of the Dead, Waters of Mars and End of Time Part 1. Those are the only 3 episodes to actually air during that 365-day period, which was at the time the most fallow period we'd had, and we've only had less in 2016 and this year 2019. So it was, I think, probably for people at the time, it was quite a sort of a change from what people had got used to, because you'd had 4 consecutive years with 4 13-episode series plus a Christmas special, so 14 episodes a year for 4 consecutive years, and then suddenly there's only 3 episodes in a year. It's like, it's quite a big difference, a big change. But that was necessitated, as I say, by just availability of actors, the situation with moving from one showrunner to another. Russell was done, he was knackered, he couldn't really do another full series. I don't think he just couldn't manage it. You read the Writer's Tale, his book about writing Doctor Who, and it sounds like an absolute nightmare trying to do 13-episode series a year. It just sounds impossible. So it's very much understandable, I think, why they ultimately had to go down the route of just having a few specials throughout 2009. And, well, they're a mixed bag of specials, I think it's fair to say. So yes, the first one was The Next Doctor, which was... I was thinking about this, and I think it's one of those episodes that's almost the most kind of as aged badly and is the most sort of relevant to its time, but not now. Because it's an episode that massively plays on the whole... David Tennant's going to be leaving and there's going to be a new Doctor. The new Doctor was being announced, I think, a couple of weeks after this episode. I think it was ultimately announced. And so it's completely playing on who could the next Doctor be? Could it be this person, David Morrissey? And just that whole idea, which works at the time, obviously, with that whole sort of hype around who's going to be the next Doctor. And then we get a sort of glimpse into, could this be a possible next Doctor? Or something along those lines. And David Morrissey does do a brilliant job in this episode. I think he portrays the Doctor really, really well. Very much a sort of David Tennant-esque Doctor, I think it's fair to say. But he does a very good job of it, and I think that he's sort of one of the standouts of the episode. But unfortunately, there's not a lot else going for it. It's not a particularly exciting story. I mean, having watched it back with Megan just a few weeks ago in our sort of rewatch of the series for her the first time, that's what she described the episode as, just simply a bit boring. And watching it again, I very much tend to agree. It probably worked as a Christmas special as well. You've got to bear in mind it aired on Christmas Day, the classic Christmas special, not so much going on, a little bit more inconsequential and all that. It's nice to see the Cybermen and a few different types of Cybermen with these sort of cyber shade thingies, the sort of almost little creatures running around, and the massive Cyber King that we see as well. But apart from that, there just isn't really very much excitement, very much to get your teeth into in this story, I find. It's a story that drags quite a lot and just isn't very exciting. It's probably a story that, yes, worked at the time, was very interesting at the time because you see the title, The Next Doctor, and you know David Tennant's about to leave, and it's like, whoa, okay, this is cool, this is exciting. But watching it back, I don't think it quite works. So that left us at the end of 2008. Then we moved to Easter time, 2009, April 2009, Doctor Who's first and I think only ever officially Easter special, although ultimately it's not particularly Eastery at all. It's just got the Doctor eating an Easter egg. It's about the furthest that it gets into being an Easter special. But this one again is a more inconsequential special, like closer to the Next Doctor than the one sort of coming up in the future. It very much is a one-off standalone episode with no real connections to any other previous or future episodes, with no real sort of consequences at the end of it. There's nobody major in it and nobody major dies in it either. But I do think it's a more enjoyable story than The Next Doctor. It's got a... I feel like there's a better cast in this story. Obviously, you've got Eunice involved, which is always exciting to see. Malcolm's just a brilliant character and just so sort of heartwarming and fun and hilarious as a character in this episode as well, which is great to see. And it's just, there's just a few sort of interesting ideas in there. They've sort of ended up and gone through a massive portal in the Earth that's then transported this bus onto this mysterious alien planet, which they're all being then left to die there and having to try and get back. And it's just, there's a few interesting ideas in there, I think a little bit more so than what we see in The Next Doctor. Again, it's hardly a classic. It's not anything I'd put in my probably top 50 Doctor Who episodes of all time. It's down in the lower bunch. But this one feels a lot more watchable, and it doesn't feel like it's dragging a lot, and it reasonably zips by, which I think is always the measure of a reasonably good Doctor Who story, which I think this succeeds in doing. Though I think one of the sort of negative things you could say about this episode is probably the fact that this was the only episode we got between December 2008 and November 2009, so in an 11-month period, this is the only new episode we got, and it's not really very good. When you do a big special episode in that sort of this vein with a long period between either side of the episode, you need it to be a big, exciting, very good story. I think that's really, really important when you have so few episodes. It's what probably was Series 11's downfall in particular as well, having less episodes, and yet they were still all not very good, or a lot of them were not very good. It's sort of, it doesn't seem to be that the logic isn't to have less episodes and the episodes you've got will be better quality. It just doesn't seem to work like that, unfortunately, despite what you might think. So I think that showed with Planet of the Dead that it was just a fairly average run-of-the-mill Doctor Who episode that was kind of billed as special when it wasn't really. It was just a slightly longer episode than normal to fill a gap in 2009. I don't want to be too harsh and critical on it because I do enjoy it. I think just probably at the time it was a little bit underwhelming, and then that prospect of goodness knows how many more months we've got to wait until the next episode of Doctor Who, something like 7 months after this episode aired, it probably felt quite a long wait at the time, particularly for me as an 11-year-old child at the time as well, when I was at the height of my Doctor Who fandom, well, my previous height of Doctor Who fandom, shall we say, as a child. But yeah, I'm sure, I can't remember it, to be honest. I really can't remember it, but I'd imagine that 7 months as an 11-year-old would be a pretty long time. But we made it through that 11-month period and we reached the waters of Mars, which is kind of on the complete other end of the spectrum from Planet of the Dead and The Next Doctor. In terms of the waters of Mars, is one of the all-time greatest Doctor Who stories. I am saying it now. I don't want to say loads about this episode because in a couple of weeks' time, after the Megan Reacts to The Waters of Mars comes out, which is going to be brilliant, check it out, I'll be doing a more in-depth review, which I have already recorded, so I don't want to give you guys too much away of what I'm going to say in that. But I do think this story is brilliant. It's probably Russell's best story he ever wrote for Doctor Who, I think. It's the perfect base under siege story. Brilliant ideas of playing with time, the idea of fixed points in time that you can't change, the consequences of changing that time as well, and sort of realising it for the various different characters involved. The threat is brilliant in the flood. It's just fantastic the way it just gradually kills off people, and then those few scenes where we see 3, 4, 5 members of the sort of main crew suddenly just getting killed off. And then the Doctor having to just stand there and listen as it's all happening. And that just pushes him over the edge to become that Time Lord victorious, which is a pretty scary moment when we see it. And so it just creates such exciting, tense, scary at times Doctor Who. I think it's just such the perfect combination of sort of factors all played into this episode so brilliantly. And at the end of the episode, the Doctor realising his mistake as well and sort of falling to his knees expecting this is the moment of his death, that's it, he's going to die. But actually then realising he doesn't want to die and just shouts no, as we see at the end of the episode, and then the sort of fade to black as well, which just sets up perfectly the finale to the David Tennant era that we're going to get with the End of Times Part 1 and 2. It's, yeah, as I say, a brilliant story, but that's all I'm going to say on it for now, so do check my review coming out in a couple of weeks' time where I'll be going properly in-depth on The Waters of Mars. And then we came to Christmas 2009. This, I think, was probably one of the most hyped periods of Doctor Who there's ever been, because David Tennant had become a sort of national figure, a national icon as the 10th Doctor. Doctor Who was at its absolute mainstream height of popularity throughout sort of 2006, 7, 8, 9. The RTD / David Tennant era was the peak of Doctor Who. It was a mainstream show. Everybody was talking about it. Everybody loved it. It was so exciting. It was properly, just everybody would be talking about it every time there's an episode on. And we reached that sort of, I think, that absolute peak with his final exit of the David Tennant Doctor. It's always going to be a very popular one because he's such a popular Doctor. And the way obviously Russell writes these two stories, very much playing on the heartstrings of the audience, building up the emotion of the Doctor and the fact that this Doctor, the 10th Doctor, does not want to die. That he feels like when he has to regenerate that it's dying, and just kind of creating that emotional connection with us even more, making us feel even more heartbreaking about it. And all of the farewell scenes in the part 2 as well just continue to add to that. It very much, I think, just all reaches an absolute crescendo in mainstream popularity, brilliance, everything combined to make it one of the most sort of epic, big, popular finales and conclusions to a Doctor I think we ever had, and quite possibly ever will have. So yes, this story aired in 2 parts over Christmas Day 2009 and January the 1st, New Year's Day 2010. So with a week apart, as you'd always get with a 2-part Doctor Who story, but 2 parts with the absolute highest stakes, with the End of Time Part 1, an hour-long episode, and Part 2, an hour and 15 minutes. Part 1 seeing the return of the Time Lords, of all things, which is pretty crazy, having just watched the story again as well. It's brilliant. I will say now, what I'm going to be doing again in 2 or 3 weeks' time, when we get the reactions of the Megan Reacts for the End of Time, I'm going to be attempting to defend my love of the End of Time, because I've said it before on this channel, and I'll say it again. The End of Time is one of my favourite Doctor Who stories. People hate it. I know loads of people hate it, despite, as I say, there was a lot of mainstream popularity at the time. I think for maybe more seasoned Doctor Who fans, a little more longer-term Doctor Who fans, even some young Doctor Who fans that just really don't like it, really want to criticise it, have many problems with it, as I'm sure some of you guys watching do. I want to at least try to give it a proper defence and a proper detailed explanation as to why I love The End of Time. Both parts, 1 and 2, a combined 2-hour, 15-minute story. It's an epic masterpiece. But I want to save a fair amount of that, again, for that video that I'm going to be doing in the future. So I don't want to sort of dig too deep into The End of Time, but more look at the, as I've mentioned, about the sort of cultural significance of this story, I think. And as I've said, I think it really is such a significant milestone in Doctor Who. It was the end of the Russell T Davies era, the end of David Tennant as the Doctor, the end of all the various companions that we've seen throughout this era, because again, what Russell did very well, and what he chose to do again in this final episode, was to involve lots of different companions over different series, build up families around them, build up the relationships between the characters, and keep introducing them back into the show, keeping them involved, building it up as this is the Doctor's big outer space family that he's got here on Earth. He's come to Earth and he's met so many friends, and he's got this huge family now of people around him that although he always ends up being alone, he still has loads of friends and family. And we get to see them all one last time at the end of this story. And of course, again, we don't really see any of these characters in the future after this. It very much is all contained within the Russell T Davies era. And even once we go past that, there's definitely less of a focus from particularly Stephen, and I think Chris hasn't really done a very good job of it, but in terms of focusing on more characters and having families of the main sort of companions and characters and having them more involved in stories and coming back and things like that, that's not so involved in the future of Doctor Who. So I think this is a very sort of significant moment to kind of end this era, this style of the programme, because this is when it was almost at its most soapy / drama-y rather than sci-fi. And then with Stephen Moffat era, it goes a bit more fairy tale, with a bit more sci-fi coming in, particularly once we get to the Capaldi era as well. And then I don't really know where we can really put Chris Chibnall's era at the moment. It sort of feels like somewhere between the two, but not really great either. Without wishing to be too negative about Series 11 and the Chris Chibnall era so far. But yes, as I say, I think that's why this era worked so well for a mainstream audience, was just because the characters were so massively relatable. It was very much built up with the sort of human drama aspect of it, obviously seeing in Series 4, or Series 2, 3, 4, the whole Doctor-Rose relationship and love story that built up there, and all of that involved as well. And then having Donna in there, Catherine Tate, a big actress, and her actually being such a brilliant character and such a good friend to the Doctor, which again just drew people in, and that just continues right through to the conclusion. Getting to see them all again is a brilliant moment. I think it's such a... Some people hate this episode for that, but I think it's such a brilliant... It sums up the Russell T Davies era so perfectly. The Doctor wouldn't... It wouldn't feel right for the Doctor to just sort of suddenly have to go off and regenerate. If he's got the time to do it, of course he'd want to go and see all his friends one last time, because they've had such a big impact on his life through these last 4 series. And so I think it makes perfect sense, and it makes it such an emotional goodbye as well. Clearly it's all about playing on the heartstrings and making it as emotional as we possibly can. And I think that it works really, really effectively in this story. In terms of digging into more of the plot, I'm going to save that for my video in the future, but I think ultimately the plot is good. It's great to see the Time Lords back. The Master's brilliant in this story. John Sim is a phenomenal actor. I think he again portrays the Master brilliantly as this crazy mad genius dude who's just a bit sort of maniacal and mental and has a lovely maniacal laugh all the time as well, it seems, but then obviously turns right at the end end of the story to go and fight off the Time Lords because they are the ones who've ruined his life for all these years with this drumbeat in his head. And it's just, there's so many brilliant things in there. Yes, it is Russell throwing everything and the kitchen sink and more at this episode to try and make it as big and epic as it can possibly be. You can tell by the budget of this story, the look of it, that there's a lot of money gone into it. And I think it works brilliantly and really does cap off and conclude the era of Doctor Who's most mainstream popularity. So yes, it's an era that I don't think will ever be quite met again personally. I struggle to see how Doctor Who could ever become that popular to a mainstream audience once again. Maybe if it was taken off the air for another 10, 15, 20 years and then reinvented and brought back again with another new popular actor that really just in a way that engages with audience once again. But ultimately I struggle to see that happening. I think that the Christian Mill era will be okay, it will have a solid popularity, but it's never going to thrive like the Russell T Davies era did. And I think even if it went off the air, I'm not convinced it would do as amazingly when it came back again. But who knows, Doctor Who keeps going, it keeps breaking barriers down, doing things you wouldn't expect it to do. It can always surprise, so you never know for the future. But I think this is a period that will always be looked on with a huge amount of nostalgia for anybody who watched it at the time, because for a lot of us, people sort of my sort of age, it was the generation we grew up in. That was the Doctor Who we grew up with, was with David Tennant through series 2 to 4. That was 4 years of our lives essentially. And for me, going from being age 7 when he first appeared on screen to age 11 when he left, that was like the peak years to be watching Doctor Who as a child. And that's why I think I'll always have such nostalgia for it, and particularly for episodes like The End of Time as well, why I'll always think so fondly for them and for this era. And so that is it. It concludes my review, my look back, my retrospective 10 years on this. Can you believe it's been, 10 years nearly since The End of Time aired, since David Tennant left being the Doctor on January the 1st next year will be 10 years since he stopped being the Doctor. That is just mental. It doesn't feel like almost yesterday that he left the role. So that's pretty crazy, but that's been my final retrospective look back. I have now completed all of the Russell T Davies era. I've also in the past done all the Stephen Moffat era as well, back in 2017 when I did, when Stephen was leaving, it was confirmed he was going to be going. I covered all of his series, so do go check those out on my channel as well if you haven't seen them already. And do of course let me know what you think of the specials. What's your favourite of the 5 sort of special episodes, if you can call some of them that? What do you think worked and didn't work about it? Do you think that ultimately it was okay to only have the 3 episodes of Doctor Who in 2009, that it was still able to keep up the popularity, or do you think it did hurt the show by having less episodes in that year? I'd love to hear what you guys have to say down in the comments below. But other than that, that's it from this video. Remember to hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and I'll see you again very soon for another one. Goodbye!